What's up guys, Sean here, and today I'm going to go over New York State's new law that ends cash bail for most crimes within the state. Since the passage and implementation of New York State's new no cash bail for most crimes within the state law, I've been thinking a lot about making this video. As many of you already know, I'm in New York, so this is a law that I have to deal with because the impacts of this law are going to have wide-ranging effects on New York and its citizens. However, if you're expecting me to make a video where I list off a number of people who would have been held on bail that are no longer being held on bail, due to the fact that this law on bail has been implemented, that's not exactly what you're going to get, because I actually am partially in favor of criminal justice reform, and I am in favor of some reforms related to bail across the country. I just don't believe that this is the appropriate way in order to achieve those goals. And I also don't want to feed into the fear that a lot of people are going to be pushing that has been pushed traditionally around criminal justice that has led to bad policy on the federal, state, and local levels. And a perfect example of bad policy not reflecting data but reflecting a horrible incident is what happened to parole in the 80s and 90s in Florida. You see, Florida had a couple of stories, which we see from time to time, of somebody who got out on parole that ended up committing a horrific other crime while they were out on parole. So in the early 80s, the state of Florida decided to limit parole, and then in the early 90s, they decided to abolish parole altogether. However, while a lot of people are under the impression that parole is early release, parole is not just early release. Parole is supervised release. So when they abolished parole, they abolished the post-release supervision that most inmates were under, and due to the fact that they did this, recidivism rates went up and not down. And the reason why they went up and not down is because people who were on parole or would have been on parole ended up not having to check in with parole officers, and they were just free and in the public. And even though crime rates got worse due to this policy, and recidivism got worse due to this policy, there was no boogeyman to point the finger at to share the blame with the person committing the crime. So people just interpreted this as people becoming repeat offenders, and thought that it had nothing to do with a policy change that negatively impacted their state. I'm not here to feed into the ignorance and bad impulses that people have to create an overcorrection to what I see as an overcorrection in the bail reform arena. Now, with that in mind, I think it's incredibly important that we all understand that even before New York State's new bail law was put into place, 89% of the people arrested in New York State were already released at their arraignments without any bail. New York is and has been a solid blue democratic state for a long time, so there already have been some reforms put into place on what can be considered when determining whether or not somebody can be released without any bail or released with a certain amount of bail. And usually the things that were factored in are their risk to the community, whether or not they're a flight risk, and their previous criminal history. What has changed in New York State after the passage of this new bail law is essentially the state legislature and Governor Cuomo have significantly limited the power of judges to provide judgment on whether or not people should be held in jail or they should be let out on bail. And they've done this by affecting all three of the factors that normally determine bail. New York has significantly limited what they consider to be serious violent felonies where judges can exercise their discretion on either setting bail or holding somebody in jail pre-trial. Crimes that you will now be released for if you commit them in the state of New York, where a judge cannot even consider whether or not to put a bond on your case, now include but are not limited to robberies without the threat of or use of a weapon will get you released from jail automatically without a single consideration of whether or not a bond should be put on your head. And those robberies can range from a purse snatching off the street, that person will be out of jail without a bond, all the way to a bank robbery as long as you don't threaten to use or use a weapon in the commission of either of those crimes. Aggravated assault on a child age 11 or under. Now call me crazy, call me a radical, call me anti-criminal justice reform, but I think that if you feel the need to assault a child under the age of 11, then maybe, just maybe, a judge should review whether or not you should be released without bail rather than just rubber stamping it. Criminal sale of a firearm to a minor, which I guess makes sense. If you're going to allow people to assault children, you might as well arm children to defend themselves against the assaulters that you're allowing. Tampering with a juror or physical evidence, bribery in the first degree, bribing a public official, or receiving a bribe as a public official. Criminally negligent homicide, aggravated vehicular homicide, manslaughter in the second degree, unlawful imprisonment, coercion in the first degree, arson in the third or fourth degree, grand larceny in the first degree, criminal possession of a weapon on school grounds or criminal possession of a firearm, the use of a child to commit a controlled substance offense, and criminal sale of a controlled substance to a child, criminal solicitation in the first degree. Oh, and stalking is now something that you will also automatically be released for at your arraignment hearing. Hashtag feminism, hashtag women's empowerment, hashtag let stalkers stalk. Now I could go on and continue reading the new list of crimes that you will now be released for automatically without even a bond hearing. However, if I did that, I would run into the territory where I'd start getting demonetized, because some of the crimes listed involve children, and let's say video cameras, and things you're not supposed to do with children and video cameras, and the distribution of that material. And of course, if you guys are confused about what I'm talking about, I'm specifically talking about the rules from the Screen Actors Guild about children working more than 4 hours on a Hollywood production. Sarcasm, sarcasm, this isn't what I'm talking about. Go click the link in the description box. Now look, I could go through these crimes for the rest of this video if I wanted to, but honestly it would be doing you a disservice because the problems with bail reform don't end with the list of crimes, they actually just begin there. Because the state of New York has also limited the judge's discretion and power in a variety of other ways. For instance, one of the purposes of having a bail system is you are trying to incentivize people to show up to their court hearing. So if you're going to remove a bail system, then you should address the lack of incentive for people to show up to that hearing. Or, if you're the state of New York, just say it's okay if they don't show up to their court hearing. Because according to this new bail law, judges can't look at your history, even if that includes your history of not showing up to court, and use that as a determination to hold you on bail. And that doesn't just apply to your history, that applies to your current case. So if you don't show up to court on the case that you're currently let out without any bail on, the judge can't do anything like set a bond to incentivize that you actually return to court. The only way that this could play a factor is if they have another hearing that proves that you are willfully not showing up to court. Now, if that sounds absurd on its face, it's about to get even more absurd because the prohibitions on judges from using your criminal history or any of your history are so strong that even if you're arrested on one of the very few crimes that does require a cash bail to get out of jail, and you do pay that bail, and then you get out of jail, if you commit another crime, as long as that other crime doesn't require a cash bail, then the fact that you are already out on bail has no impact on whether or not you are still eligible for that release without bail, meaning you will be released even though you have committed or been accused of another crime while pending trial for a crime that you just bonded out of. Now, I said I would be avoiding individual cases, but this actually happened, and I think an individual case in this example will help illustrate how bad this provision is. A man in Rochester who was out on bail for shooting a cop was arrested again for a drug charge that doesn't require bail to be released, so they just released him. Now look, with all you just heard, I'm sure some of you are already advocating for an overcorrection in the other direction, but I do think some criminal justice reforms are important, and one of the things that I try to emphasize in this video is the removal of discretion from judges, which I think is at the core of some of the problems that we have in our criminal justice system. Because when you examine a lot of these problems, whether they're brought up by the left or people on the right about our criminal justice system, whether they're mandatory minimums or this removal of discretion in terms of bail, a lot of these problems can be boiled down to not letting judges make judgments, which is weird because they're literally called judges. We are not only supposed to have 3 separate branches of government, both on the state and the federal level, but those branches of government are supposed to be distinct from one another. They're supposed to do different things. Yet we've accepted the fact that judges and the president, or judges and the executive, write our laws. And we've accepted that for some reason the legislature should usurp the powers that actually belong with the judiciary. I believe in the presumption of innocence, and it should be an absolute last resort to hold somebody in jail while they're awaiting trial, especially with all the delays that happen before a trial actually occurs. However, we should not solve problems created by taking away discretion from judges by taking away discretion from judges. We shouldn't remove bail because bail is an important part of making sure people actually show up for their court dates. This law is wrong-headed because it's not rooted in the presumption of innocent until proven guilty or individual liberty. The talk surrounding this is related to the criminalization of poverty, and it's backed up by the bad data that suggests that 40% of American families can't handle a $400 emergency, which is just factually not true if you look into the data.
To understand how we got here, we need to start with the fact that 40% of people in the United States cannot afford a $400 emergency cost.
As I pointed out more than a few times on this channel, that 40% number includes people who have the money on hand and could pay for their $400 bill, but choose to charge it on a credit card for whatever reason, or choose to borrow the money from somebody else to pay it, even if they have the money in cash or in their bank account, which is considered the cash equivalent. And if the problem was completely innocent people that are in jail awaiting trial just because they can't afford bail, and the pressure that those people feel to strike a plea bargain, then you could solve that problem by just capping the high range of bail. If you were to cap bail in the state of New York, set a maximum that the state of New York can charge you if they're going to issue you bond in order to get out of jail at around $100,000 or $50,000, and you use that as your murder benchmark, you know, the worst crimes of the worst crimes, and then scaled everything else to that, then you would solve the problem of poor people being stuck in jail. Because remember, you don't have to put up the whole bail amount just because that's the bond set by a judge. A bail bondsman will bail you out of jail just for 10% down. There you would have a system that isn't prohibitively expensive for poor people, allows judges to use their discretion to a certain point, and you can add on ankle monitoring and house arrest for rich people that could easily pay that you fear that are flight risk. And if you're that worried that $50K or $100K with an ankle monitor won't deter a rich person from fleeing the country, then you can have those special discretionary circumstances where the judge can deny that very small select group of people bail based on the fact that they're a flight risk. Now, I know that's not a perfect solution. I'm sure if you gave me more time, I could come up with something more concise. I could look at the data and maybe put together a better plan. But based on the new bail reform as it stands right now, and based on that list of 32 felonies that I read you a couple from earlier in this video, 20,000 people who would normally be released with some kind of bail or held in jail pre-trial will be released onto the streets of New York. No questions asked, without any incentive to show up to court. But those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias, support me with the various support links. This has been me talking about New York City bail. Till next time.